Hello, this is Mark Clennon, and this is How I Create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else.
Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. There's a saying that a photograph is worth 1,000 words, but for today's guest, each image is worth 1,000 truths. Meet Mark Clennon, a photographer whose lens does more than capture moment. It reveals authenticity in its purest form. From the bustling streets of New York City and Florida to his current home in LA, Mark has built a career on finding the raw, unfiltered beauty in both commercial campaigns and intimate documentary work. But what makes his story particularly compelling is how he's navigating the delicate balance between artistic pursuit and family life. As a father and visual storyteller, Mark is crafting a legacy that goes beyond the frame, one that encourages people to embrace their authentic selves and celebrate the quiet dignity of everyday experiences. Mark is here to share how he captures the truth through his lens and why creating images that resonate across generation matters now more than ever. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hello, happy to be here. You made me sound like such an artist. Thank you for the great introduction.
I have a surprise for you. The surprise is that you are an artist.
Yeah, that's how true. You're right. You got it. 100%.
Mark, you have such an interesting background. So you grew up in Florida. You worked in Sarasota for a bit and ended up being in New York and going to New York. Can you tell me about those early years of growing up in Florida? Were there any moments in which creativity kind of sneaked its way into your personal life?
Yeah, I mean, my life in Florida was a good one. Artistically, I'm not so certain. I think I've just always been a very curious kid and a very curious person. I've always just wanted to know how things were made or, where that came from or, I was just always exploring those types of hints and treats of life, like whether it be, photoshopping hall passes for my classmates. That was one of my earliest creative endeavors in high school, or just working at the library, being surrounded by books and just being bored out of my mind and just flipping through, as many books as I could, not necessarily reading them, but, flipping through the pages just to look at the photos sometimes, not really realizing that I was kind of ingesting artistic images at the time in high school. I think that's when the bug kind of grew for me in terms of maintaining that curiosity in all things culture.
Once you moved to New York, you started doing photography, and it was your mom who gave you, you were doing photography with your phone, and your mom ended up giving you a DSLR. Can you tell us about that gift and when you opened the box to see the camera there? Tell us how you felt when she gave you that gift.
I was already in New York, enjoying my time in the city. As a young business person, I was working in tech at the time. And for Christmas, I believe, my mom got me a Canon T5i, a $300 starter camera with the extra lens. I think it was an 18 to 55 paperweight. but I got the camera and I walked over to Central Park. I lived in Harlem at the time, so it was a quick walk. And I took a few photos and I went back home and put them in my computer. I'm like, dang, these are not good. I don't know if I like this. And then I put the camera down and it sat on that desk for a full calendar year. I did not pick it up again. It was a literal paperweight. I would say this is too, it was too hard. I didn't like carrying it around. It was too big for me to carry around the city. So I'm like, not into it. I'll stick with my phone. And then that was that. Then my friend one of my frat brothers moved to New York, and he had the same camera as me, and he was walking around taking photos. I'm like, I got that same camera. I can dust it off. I'll walk with you and take some photos. And we ran into my other frat brother who had a camera as well. So the three of us were just walking around the city, taking pictures and having like a little friendly competition about like who can get the coolest photo. And I think that's when it stuck because I had like a little cohort of people to do it with me. And so the second time I picked up that camera, it stuck. And I really started to enjoy the process of learning how to use it. I mean, I was shooting on auto mode for, the first several months. And then, the three of us were like, all right, let's try to shoot on manual, and we'll try to learn aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. And it's funny, like the thought of me learning how to do that because these things come so naturally. It's like a language to me now. But at the time, just learning aperture, shutter speed and ISO was my goal, just to get, just a little bit better. And from there, it just kind of grew and grew to where I started to take myself a little bit more seriously. And after a year, so I was 2017, I quit my job to pursue it full time.
While you quit your job to pursue photography full time, in the meantime, you were busy making relationships. You were busy building community through these photo walks. It wasn't just with these three friends that you were doing the photo walks, but you were like just connecting everywhere you went. Can you tell me about the gradual decision, or maybe it was an abrupt decision that you made to go and do photography full time? How did that decision come about for you?
It was everything. Now that I look back on it, everything happened so fast. Yeah, it was just the three of us, and then we made a group chat, and then we would run into other Black photographers in New York, and we add them to the group chat. And then we ran into somebody, and eventually the group chat had 700 people. And 700 people in the group. It was a group me, 700 people, Black photographers in the New York City area. So yeah, we did build community, and we activated on that by having these photo walks. I think the first photo walk that we hosted, I was still shooting on auto mode. I barely knew how to use my camera, right? Until we grew from there. And that community, that cohort of us, were able to grow alongside each other and make careers of our own. But, that first year, I worked at a company that's been acquired by Verizon since, but it was called AOL, America Online. And I was working as like a tech salesperson there, but in the same building was a Huffington Post. So I had some friends at Huffington Post, other Black folks. And I was like, oh, I'm going to this Afro punk festival. Do y'all need pictures? I'll just give them to you for free. And you're like, yeah, we'll do it. And so that was like my first byline, was shooting the Afro Punk Festival in Brooklyn. And then that's my first time getting any type of traction on the internet or Instagram. I'm like, oh, this is like a fun, like, I like this hobby. Like, it's becoming like a real thing. Like, I have a Huffington Post byline now. Like, I'm getting some momentum. Perhaps I should do more of this. And then I was, alongside building that community, just getting better by shooting brunches and parties and day parties, people who were inebriated. Let me hold your camera. Let me see my picture. Like, it was all of that played a part in like the growth of what I was doing. So I would work, 9 to 5, 9 to 6. And in the weekend, there'll be, a bunch of parties in New York, and I would be the photographer. And I'll walk around the club or whatever, taking pictures of people and uploading them, making 200 here, 300 here, just enough money to buy a better lens eventually, and then buy a better camera body eventually, or just everything was kind of paying for itself in those early days. And then I saw a pathway like, hey, maybe if I really took this thing seriously, and I wasn't really into my job at the time. And I was meeting a lot of hairstylists, and we were shooting like little small campaign type photo shoots. We were still doing stuff for free, but like maybe if I really tried hard, I could make a little money from this. And then I started to book things pretty regularly in the event space. Then I'm making $1,000 in a month. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Good. We get a little traction here. Still not making more than I was making at my regular job, but like I felt some traction, and then I got into my first few bids. I think the first bid was for Genius. I think I quoted them like $2,000 for like a 3-day shoot, But I'm like, oh, okay, there's an ecosystem here, and I can use all the tools that I'm using now. Like I work in a professional setting. I was really good at handling and dealing with clients because I did that on a regular basis. I can make my own decks and briefs. I had experience making websites and managing email lists, all the things that you need to do as a photographer. So I knew Photoshop very well from being a graphic designer in college. So all these things kind of lent itself towards photography, and it just made perfect sense. So I was kind of waiting on getting laid off because there were a lot of layoffs happening in the company at that time. And then one layoff came and I didn't get laid off. And I was like, man, I guess I'm just going to have to quit. So October 2017 is when I decided to quit. It was my New Year's resolution in 2017. I thought I was going to quit like January or March of 2017, but I kept putting it off, partially because I was scared and I didn't know what I was doing at the time. But October was the day. It's October now. So yeah, it's, 7 years ago, I quit my job and I'll never look back.
What happened next? So you quit your job, you're earning a bit of money here and there, but as you mentioned, not enough to replace the salary that you were earning working at AOL. How did you close that gap in terms of being able to put yourself out there and earn the money that you needed in order to live?
October is not a good time to enter the photo business. It's probably the worst time.
Now we know, right?
Now
we know.
Yeah. Now I know. So yeah, I saved up $25,000. I'm like, okay, let me take this $25,000 and see what I can do. Like how long it can last me. October, I did a whole campaign. So I shot like a video, basically like a grand opening. I'm doing this photography full time. My goal was to let everybody know I am no longer doing that. I'm doing this. And I felt like that was very important for me to have like a grand opening. Like it had to be a grand, epic announcement, right? It just can't be like a tweet or a LinkedIn update. So I shot a video and I explained why I quit. And, it resonated really well with a lot of people on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. And then I got my first call from Tiffany Warren on Facebook. She sent me a Facebook message and I don't check Facebook very often. But she sent me a fake and I got it. And I flew out the next week to shoot the Ad Color Conference and Awards, which is a conference highlighting and celebrating, minorities in advertising and equitable advertising. So that was my first gig, like the first week after I quit my job. So that was great. It was amazing. I got flown out to LA, shot for a week, and I learned a lot about, the ad business in the process. But after that, crickets. So I'm hustling, go through the holidays. Of course, nothing's happening in the holidays. I'm still shooting like little events and parties here and there. I'm taking on like clients. So I had like my packages where like, all right, so with this package, the silver package, you get 10 photos, and I was just working my way up. So I had that whole email funnel list where I'm getting clients and I'm shooting them. So now I'm shooting my day rate at that time. Sometimes I'm gonna get a good gig for like $900 for like 2 days of work, but like I was just lining up. I was still making away. But I think by March, I was like, that $25,000 turned into like $1,500. And I was really like, I don't know if this is going to work. And then a friend of mine, Tanya Spencer, we were at a Culture Con or a CCNYC event in New York. And I was shooting the photos. And she's like, oh, I just got this job at Foot Locker. Like, and when I really start, I'm definitely going to tap you in for, to do a shoot with Foot Locker. I'm like, okay, yeah. And I believed her, but I'm like, I'm not going to like put all my eggs in his basket. It's a good lead. But sure enough, maybe a month later, she's like, hey, like we're ready for our first, shoot with Foot Locker. This was my first commercial shoot. And did I need it. I'm like, okay. So it was a Subway themed shoot. So we're shooting on the subway, and I took a good friend of mine, Rashida, who's worked as my assistant and collaborator, for ever since this first shoot. I took her through the subway and I simulated the entire shoot from shot 1 to the last shot the day before. And I edited the photos and everything. So the next day when we came to the shoot, I had already shot the shoot. We just had the talent now. And we just ran through the exact same poses I did, the exact same parts of the subway. We simulated what time of day it will be. Because, it's a subway. We didn't have like official permits. We had to work around people. I found stations that were at the end of the track. So you have we timed it like maybe 5 minutes to shoot it before I left the station. And that was my first shoot. I really did a good job with it. Tanis was super happy. This was her first shoot with Foot Locker. Foot Locker really loved it. And from there, I was running. It was Foot Locker back to back to back. So I'm shooting bunch of Foot Locker stuff, and other people are hitting me up for like different campaigns. And that's when I started to get a lot more traction in the commercial space. And all the while, I'm still doing like experimental shoots and partnerships with companies like PeerSpace to work on my editorial side of my business. So that was the first shoot. That first shoot was Foot Locker and Champion. And once that one hit, I was able to kind of keep that momentum rolling all the way, to where I am.
You did something that is, what we do now, which is called pre-light.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a site scout and a pre-light. Yes.
You did a pre-light day. Over here in Chicago, we just say tech day. So that was your tech day.
Yeah, it was a tech day. Tech scout. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With no tech.
With no tech, no digi, nothing. I shot everything with a Mark III probably, and a 24-70 and an 85 millimeter lens. But yeah, I knew my spots. I knew exactly what we were going to do. And I was really nervous. I was really nervous that day. And looking back, like if I was presented with that same shoot again, like I probably wouldn't be as nervous, but I'm nervous for every shoot anyway. So.
I am as well. I think people don't realize the amount of prep that goes into it. And the thing that I came to realize is whenever something looks really easy that another photographer has done, I know that it was really hard.
Yeah.
Because the whole point is to make it look easy, because there's all of this training that has come in to doing it. And then, obviously there's like all of the texts that are around to make the light look like it looks.
Yeah. No, it's funny because you see some of these photos and it looks like it's just the photographer and the one person in the woods. And me knowing production, it's like, yeah, there's probably 35 people out there all looking at the photographer, while they make these shots. So yeah, that was my first, learning about the commercial space is like the prep. The prep is super important.
It's all in the prep. What brought you over to Los Angeles? Why did you make the move from New York to LA?
I kind of ended up in LA kind of by accident. Like I'm still surprised that I live here. I just floated the idea. We floated the idea. We flirted with the idea of like moving to Los Angeles. This is the latter part of the pandemic years where we had spent the whole pandemic in Manhattan, in Harlem, in a cramped space, not able to properly socially distance and et cetera. It was just a lot of, New York was a lot at the time. And I just had my daughter and we were like, let's just try out LA for a little bit, or like, let's just test it out. And next thing you know, we just kind of ended up moving out here. And it was kind of like a shell shock. Like, oh, wait, we really live in LA. And so my first couple of weeks, I would like leave in a van or something and drive to the hotel I usually stay at in LA before I went home. Like, oh, I literally forgot that I live here. But I think it was just a change of pace, lifestyle change. A lot of the work was coming out here when I was living in New York. Like I was coming out to LA for a one-day shoot. Let's say the shoot was on a Wednesday. So I'm flying in Monday or Tuesday, shooting for one day and flying back. It's like a whole week I'm kind of burned flying back and forth from LA. So I just felt like there's a lot of opportunities out here for me. And my wife, who works at a large tech company as well, she could switch offices fairly seamlessly. So it enabled us to kind of make that transition over.
At this point in your career, Mark, your work is amazing. It has your fingerprints, your DNA all over it. I'm wondering, you do editorial work, you do commercial work, lifestyle work. What have you learned over these past few years in terms of a way to make sure that that DNA, that fingerprint really is all over the photo shoot or the assignments that you get?
Now, that's a good question. Like I used to struggle with like trying to figure out like what my work was, especially like when we talk about that first year, those early years in New York where I'm just trying everything. Again, like I'm just a very, very curious person. I'm going to try it all, So, when I was coming up, I was at music festival pits, shooting music festivals. I was doing crowd shots. I was doing New York Fashion Week backstage. I was doing street style. I was doing parties, right? I was doing it all. And people are like, you're going to have to like pick your thing if you want to have a career in this business. And I kind of didn't, it felt prickly to hear that. So I just said, what I'm doing is kind of working now. So I'm just going to keep doing everything that I like to do. And then I'll figure it out. And I think that was a right decision for me. Like everybody has a different path. So for me, I got to a certain point where I just looked at my website, or like I laid out all the images that I made from the Fashion Week stuff, backstage, street style, documentary type work, event coverage, editorial, my own conceptual, singular fine art projects. And I started to like notice trends. Well, obviously, like we have Black people in these images. I can see a through line there, but like I can see an emphasis on like, wow, hair and hair texture. I like to have, when I have two subjects, their heads are touching pretty often, like that type of tenderness is there. There's some floral elements that kind of find their way into my work somehow. I don't really have the color blue. For some reason, I don't really have much blue in my work. My work is a little warmer, even when like I'm not thinking about it. I kind of found some through lines like, wow, like my sets will start off very, very colorful, but I do a lot of like intentional work to kind of bring those colors in together to kind of mesh a little bit, like round them out. Everything's rounded edges. So I'm like, okay, like I see these patterns. Okay, that's me. That now that I've shot all this stuff, as long as it has like the things that I just mentioned, or like 3 of the 4, it's me. So you can swap out the subject, but you still have these other elements, this warmth to it, and it's still me. You can make an image cooler, like it can be a cooler temperature image, but it has the rest of these elements, and it still has me. And I realized like a lot of my work, they're either, I know sounds silly, but they're either intentionally looking directly into the camera, right at me, or they're intentionally looking down or away. And I know that's like, there's only 2 options there, but like, I don't know. I just feel like I capture the in-between moment between that looking directly at camera and looking down at me. You can kind of feel both of them in one in my work. So that in-between moment, so there's a movement to it that's not necessarily like an athletic feel. They're not like, people aren't sprinting, but they look like they've just finished moving. And those are some elements that over time I was able to identify in my own work. So now that I'm able to identify, okay, this is what I am foundationally. I used to have the term called like a whimsical defiance. So I used that term in those earlier years, like in my brain, like, okay, does it have like a whimsical defiant, like attitude to it? And as long as it has that, it's going to feel like me. You know, obviously there's in certain situations when we're working on like in the commercial space, there's some concessions that need to be made for specific SKUs or, you know, specific products. But in my selects, you know, the selects that I pull out from my client work, you know, I just put out something for Wrangler, which I was shocked that I was even on that set because it's very cowboy, very Western, but it still feels like me. And so I was like, oh, I'm very proud of this because I was in an environment I didn't think I would match well. Well, I knew I could do it, obviously, but even when I was shooting, I'm like, these look good, but I'm curious to see how like it'll translate in and integrate into my work. And I think it did a great job of doing so with the colors, with the movement, with the direct eye contact, with the, you know, intentional lookaways and engagement.
I always find that people, when I ask these questions, that sometimes people have to really think about it. It's not a canned answer. And sometimes we do know why we do the things that we do, but we don't really know how we've necessarily come to our creative voice. But sometimes we do know it's a recipe that it does take very specific ingredients to arrive at the final product. In your case, I noticed that your work is very cinematic, and there's also a bit of haze. Or do you tend to use haze or atmosphere in a can?
Not as I've used it for sure. I've definitely used it. I haven't used it as often as you might think. I think, yeah, I've heard the word cinematic before we describe it, but no, I don't use the atmosphere. I think it's a lot. I think a lot of it has to do with my posts. Like I enjoy playing with the curves. I tend to crush my highlights like down. And so when I bring those highlights down on the curve, not like on the slider, it kind of forces the colors to touch more. That's the only word I can think of. So that might be, and I also love shooting the shadow. Like I love shooting from the shadow side, which I know a lot of DPs like that as well. So like the light source is indirect or behind the subject many times. So it kind of lends itself to the interesting light. But I try not to overthink things. I try to keep it instinctual. And actually, one thing I learned when visiting museums, especially photography exhibits, and you'll see a photo on the wall, and it's just that one photo on the wall. And if you look at it long enough, as a photographer, as a photo artist, you're like, I know they took an image right after this, and I know they took an image just before this. And I know they walked around and took different angles, likely. Like, that decision-making process is fascinating to me. Like, wow, okay, this photographer chose this image, and I probably wouldn't have chose this, but I'm trying to figure out why they chose this image as opposed to the other images I'm imagining in their set. And that is also like allowing me to kind of be more decisive in the images that I choose. Because I'm thinking about the artists that I see on the wall. Like, okay, if I only had one image, my decision making is also informing my work. So like that one image that I might choose where it looks like they're in between something, it might look awkward to someone else, or like it might look like a full pose to someone else, but like it works for me. And so I also understand, like, in post or in my decision making, me selecting which images also lend a large voice into my work. So a lot of times when you're shooting an editorial, you don't get to choose the cover. Or a commercial, you don't get to choose like the final image. That might stray away from like my voice, but my selects usually are much more closer to my general ethos.
I guess for me, one of the things that I do, like going back to talking about ingredients. So the ingredients are there, but then the thing that's the most important are one of three feelings, one of three emotions that need to be in the work. And if two out of the three, if it has to have at least two, if it has three, all the better. And I think you mentioned that earlier as well.
How do you cull your images? Like if you have a big job or a big shoot, like you have 1,000 images, how do you get it down to the 15 or?
Yeah. Well, I finally started using Photo Mechanic, and everyone's been talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
And I just used it. I was using Bridge for the longest time, which, by the way, like sucked up so much of my time. And then when I'm on commercial jobs, and if I am tethering, then I will use Capture One to get my selects. But as you're going through, especially if you're working with a digital tech, they're helping with getting the rough batch of selects for you. And then from there, I have to look for really great composition. All of those ingredients that we talked about have to be in that image. And then what I call it, the core values of Martine Severin photography have to be in it. And if the core values aren't in it, then at least 2 out of the 3 have to be in it. If they're not there, then we got to move on. If something just doesn't work at all, I always think, let's include it and let's see what happens when we tone it. Because once you tone it, then it might make sense. But the easy question, Mark, is the throwaway images that I take are always the winners. The ones I don't think about at all. It's like, oh, let me just do this really quickly. It'll take me half a second. I'll just go ahead and take that image and move on. 9 times out of 10, those are the ones that end up coming in. The same thing happens with you?
Yeah. So yeah, for me, yeah. What I do is I try to encourage that to happen. So let's say I do most of my editing these days in Capture One or in Photoshop, but let's say I have 100 images. I will tap through those 100 images so fast. I will go tap, 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 tap. And I won't stop until something catches my eye. And that's generally composition. Like I'm barely looking at these photos and I mark it 1. So I end up marking like a lot of 1s. And then I go in slower and then just the 1s turn to 2s, 2s turn to 3s, 4s turn to 5s. And then I get down to my 5s. But that's kind of how I do it. But before I ship everything, I go back to the ones I never marked. And there's always one that's like, this is the perfect one. Or I look for small elements. Like, I like this element. I have no shame. I will crop into the smallest, little, tiniest piece of an image if it works for me. And so I've some of my favorite images and some of our most effective images have been like some pretty grotesque crops, like really tiniest part of a frame. But I'm going to stop me. I think that it's like digging for gold sometimes in this, that's discovery is what I love to find. And it's finding those little small elements of a photo that I can turn into a whole completely different composition is exciting to me.
And it's so much easier to do these days because, you have these files that are they're huge. And so you can do a massive crop and turn something that's landscape to portrait. One of the things that I am curious to hear about from you is about community building. You had built a huge community in New York and you've moved to LA. You've been there for 2 years. How are you going about building your community in that part of the country?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's a lot harder than I anticipated. And I was just telling a friend, for the first time in my life, I've had to say the words, I'm putting myself out there. It has always come naturally to me to just find myself in a place that is ripe and conducive for creativity and connections of people. And I think New York had a lot to do with that because it's a subway. Everybody goes to the same few photo shops. And also I was in an earlier part of my career. So there's just more people doing it, and there's more people looking to learn. As I've progressed in my career, it's a lot harder to we all got deliverables at this point. We all have 4 to 5 briefs. I got to work on a brief right after this, right? So we have 4 to 5 briefs to work on. So it's been a much heavier lift the further I get in my career to find new community in a new city. But you do find it. The answer is I'm not really sure. I'm just going to places where people's minds are open. So if there's a panel on creativity and photography, and even if I don't know any people on the panel, the people in the audience and the crowd are in a place where they want to make connections and learn about the craft and talk about the craft. So, okay, that's where I need to be at. So I'll go by myself and try to meet some folks. But it's really been the older I get, and especially the city that I live in, I'm finding that I have to be very intentional in creating the space and the time to make new connections that are not just business based, but just community based, which is why I've been intentional about some of the projects that I've been working on where I get to just meet people in the community, like our Father's Hands project where photograph fathers and sons. And I did it out in LA. I make it free for everybody in conjunction with the Black Image Center here in LA. And I was able to meet a lot of LA families and people in the community who have moved to LA or from LA. So that's allowed me to kind of build community around these organizations by using photography. I guess that's the easiest way for me to meet people is photography. So just bringing my camera to places that allow me to make those connections, I think for me is most important in terms of just meeting people and then finding community in this industry, especially, just using my camera to work with as many people as I can. So I'm working with new digitechs and new first assistant lighting directors, and just treating my teams well so that, we keep those connections strong.
It's really difficult to make friends at this age. And it's really difficult to network too, because you're a father, you have a young child, and oftentimes life isn't the same. Family life isn't the same as it was when we were younger, before family life, right? There's bedtimes and there's all this stuff that has to happen. And then moving to a new city is tough because it is in some ways like starting over. And I know because I moved from London to Chicago, it takes a while. But then afterward, you do hit your stride where you'll meet people on a professional level, you'll meet people on a personal level, and then there's schools and couples and all that stuff. It happens, but just a little bit slower than we would like.
Yeah. It's not like when we were kids, you like Batman? Me too. Besties. It was that easy back then. As adults, time, calendars, invites, rescheduling, so yeah.
Mark, as we wrap up, could you tell me about a job that you've had that has been easy, beautiful, and that's kind of brought out the best in you? And I want to frame this with the fact that you have worked with a lot of A-list folks. You've worked with no-name folks. You've worked with small brands. You've worked with multinational brands. I'm just really interested to hear what some of those experiences might be for you.
There's always a curveball, but I think I did one with Kate Spade that was very smooth. Like we all had a central location, meeting places. They had omelets for breakfast crafted. At the time, I had never seen, I'm like, wow, we really doing it big with the omelets, like the custom omelet. They have an omelet maker. This is great. But like the communication was great. The schedule, everything was scheduled to a T. And a lot of times, the industry's been shifting to where a lot of times as a photographer, we're working on motion sets, and sometimes we're an afterthought, but we're also key art. So it's a lot. There's always like that friction of like trying to find my time to get my shots. But I feel like we had our designated time to get our shots, and we work with a great creative director and producer to help us see it across the finish line. But it's funny because the really smooth ones, I'm not sure that I remember as well as the ones as where like there's some unforeseen production issue or just stuff that's out of our control, and we found ways to problem solve and get it done anyway. So I feel like those are the memorable ones where we really get to flex our problem solving skills and muscles. And so in a lot of ways, I kind of enjoy.
Well, can you give me an example as to one of those experiences where you came out with a solution or you came out learning something that you're like, that was great. I'm glad I learned that.
My most recent shoot, I learned that sometimes less is more. And I know that sounds cliche, but sometimes the simpler image is more effective to the story that you're trying to tell. So I did a shoot that involved 2 moving cars and a lot of props, and we're out in the desert, and I was shooting film. I was shooting digital. I was shooting Super 8. I had a DP with an Ari. And we're all in this truck, and we're driving. I'm switching between 3 cameras. And then I get all the images back, and I'm like, oh, I should have just used a Super 8 and a film camera and not messed around with any of the other cameras. I probably would have had a more effective story because I felt like my brain was segmented in so many different ways. And for my personal projects, I tend to try to do everything. And for our commercial projects, where we have a little bit more budget, everybody has their designated task. So for my personal work, especially, and as I move into the work I do more for clients, it's like I have to be able to delegate my brain space to people that I trust to help me see my vision forward, right? So, I have certain assistants that I work with that are very technical, and they know the lighting to a T. They have all the latest gear, and I need to trust them. Or I have other assistants who have the experience mentally, what it takes to overcome a long shoot that's 15 hours or more with a celebrity talent. I need to trust their advice. So what I'm learning now is if we want to truly make, the world in our brains come to life and give birth to these ideas, we have to be able to communicate clearly to our teams and allow them to do their thing so I can focus on like seeing the vision forward. Because at a certain point, it becomes less about the technical aptitude of if I can work this camera or not, and more about can I see this vision through and work around certain solutions. So I'll give you an example. Another example of like, when I get on set and we're shooting on location, I always have like a backup place because I do not like the sun. The sun is not my friend. And I like to be in the shade. I like all even. So I'm always cognizant of like the plan B. If there's a partly cloudy situation, okay, do we have a solution to where we can get something on a zoom reflector to simulate the sun if we need it and diffuse it? So I'm bringing my own diffusion with me just in case it rips or somebody forgot it on the order. So always identifying like the environments that I like, just as a plan B.
You offered some really wonderful, just great thoughts, because in some ways I feel the same way. And then in some other ways, stylistically, I think, oh, I'm on the other end of that wavelength. But it's just so, for me, it's such a treat to hear different people's perspectives on how they approach their creative work. Because, I'll do it one way, you'll do it another way. But at the end of the day, it's really your eye, it's your vision, it's your DNA, your fingerprints that are all over it.
Yeah. And I've learned in this profession, like we're really getting paid for our tastes. right? So once I got that realization on set, I have a little bit more confidence in saying like, if I don't like it, I don't even have to say why. It's like, it doesn't look good to me. I think we should try something else. And in the back of my mind, I'm always like, I've been hired because of my taste in images. So if I say I don't like it, then to me, I don't like it. So you hired me to make things that are in my voice. And that's given me like a little bit of extra confidence going into a lot of my shoots.
I always think about taste floss, which is kind of a weird thing. But where do you go to floss your taste to make sure that you're staying nice and squeaky clean and that you're allowing room for inspiration to come through and allowing different ideas to come through so that you can reflect and stay current and refreshed, really?
Combination of things like the museum exercise when I go to photo exhibitions, and I just like think about what the photographer might have been thinking while they show that image. But I'm buying a whole bunch of photo books. All I need is a nice cover and I'll buy it. Or maybe not even that. But so flipping through those. But even for me mentally, I spend a lot of time, probably more time than I should, on the internet, consuming things that aren't good or just frivolous. So I've even like too many podcasts. I'm always inputting something. And it's the times where I'm able to turn everything off, the podcast, the internet, the football game, the basketball game, and just sit in stillness. Those are actually where my ideas come. Like a lot of people say, oh, I got this idea in the shower. But what are the scenarios in the shower? You have no devices. You're just in the water by yourself. So trying to carve out that quiet, alone space for me where I can just clear my mind and create an environment for creativity, which for me is quiet space, maybe like a little bit of light music, but a lot of times no music, just silence and sometimes darkness. But as a father of a young child, it's hard to put that together. But I know what it takes for me to be creative and for me to be inspired is coming from within. So I need to allow myself the silence to allow myself to hear my own thoughts for an extended period of time. So anything I can do to create that environment for myself is additive to my creativity. And of course, films, music, documentaries also inspire me as well. And that intentional stuff that I seek out is much more fruitful than the stuff that kind of scatters by my timeline. So I try to stay away from the timeline as a source of creativity.
That makes so much sense. I have a Substack newsletter, and I don't know if I published this last week because sometimes I will start with an idea, and I write about creativity on Substack. And so the newsletter is called Creative Matters. And I started writing last week on Akilah Townsend, who is a Chicago-based commercial photographer. You should really check out her work. I think there's some crossover. You'll really vibe with her work. But as I was thinking about her work and thinking about her journey, because she's a self-taught photographer, and one of the things that she talks about is about play and going to the museum, like what you were talking about, going to do different things in regards to coming up with new ideas and looking for inspiration. So there's that. And I was thinking about, okay, so what's the neuroscience behind play? I love neuroscience. I spent my formative years working in academia. So neuroscience is I love it. But turns out that play in adults is really important because that's where that taste floss, that mental floss we were talking about comes in. Because when you're doing things like taking a shower, when you are working on Legos with your daughter, or when you are just going for a run or putting a puzzle together, whatever it is that you're not doing, that's not looking for information, your mind is at rest, your mind isn't focusing, and therefore all of the things that you're looking for, you can think about it like a lake that's really calm. And so then underneath, there's all of the things that were lost that kind of bubble up to the top. And that won't happen. That process of those things bubbling up to the top, it's not going to happen unless the lake is a little calm, when you're not actively thinking about creativity. You're just doing something else, and you're doing something else unrelated to what you already do. They call it creative play because that's when it comes in, and that's when you'll get those aha moments.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So Pharrell had the Lego movie, and I have the Lego set, and I've been having so much fun just putting together the Lego set. One, I didn't know Lego sets were as difficult as they are. I'm like, oh, this is harder than I thought. I thought I could do this in one spin, but it's been like a week or two now. But yeah, I'm getting so much joy out of that, and it's just me playing with Legos as a grown man, which lends itself to the point you just made. So yeah, that's a great point.
Have you been to Legoland with your daughter yet?
Not yet. It's on a long list of itineraries or places we will be hitting.
It's intense.
Yeah, I bet.
But that said, this has been so much fun, Mark. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Hi there. I have a quick favor to ask you before you go. If you're loving the show, would you mind taking a quick second to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite go-to podcast app? Here's the thing. Those reviews are like magic fairy dust. They help other creatives of color discover our show and tap into their own artistic superpowers. While you're at it, why not subscribe to our Substack newsletter, Creative Matters? Creative Matters is like a weekly dose of inspiration delivered straight to your inbox. You can find the link to subscribe in the show notes. All right, that's all that I have for you today. I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Bye.